Well, hello. Welcome to the Small Business Association of Michigan Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Catley, president of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And I'm flying solo today. Rob Fowler, our CEO that normally joins me, could not join us. So I'll be flying solo, but also a little bit later on, we're going to have Mike Burns on the show from the American Society of Employers. And we're going to talk about a lot of the specifics, things that employers might be wondering or thinking about. In terms of the changes in the mask compliance and changes all the rules. And as always, this briefing is sponsored by Health Screen. It is still necessary to do health screening. A great text-based app that Small Business Association of Michigan directly uses in order to comply with the rules for health screening, which still are in place today. So remember that what happened on Friday affects face masks, not the other workplace safety rules. So let's get, today's Monday, we're going to start out with the Merck data. So the Merck data is really about everything is heading in the right direction, and we're feeling pretty good about where things stand at the moment. And as we move forward with the condition of the pandemic or where things stand today, we can do so, I think, with some confidence that things are going to start moving pretty quickly. And so I'm going to start here just with our gross case numbers. And as you can see, the reduction is still continuing at a pretty rapid pace. And as it starts to get lower, you'll see it flatten out just a little bit more. Of course, this is the report through last week, and it's gone even lower than this. The numbers over the weekend really averaged at about a little over 1,000 cases per day, so less than half of what you see here. So a really, really good sign that we're on the right track. We like to compare the spring wave here in green with the blue wave, the fall wave. And the peak lasted a shorter period of time this time, and then it's pretty much tracked the same trajectory as before, which is what we expected to happen. And this was several weeks back, we put in a projection of what we thought the decrease would look like. And here you are, the decrease followed that pretty quickly. But this line right here, this dotted line, is an important threshold. So below 250 cases per million. So that's where we're at, below 250 cases per million. And that is the threshold we needed to make before the office reopening on the 24th of May. So we have met that threshold, and it's going to go much, much lower than that. The trajectory actually looks really good on every front. The positivity rate has continued to fall at a much sharper rate than what we've seen in the past. Another good sign. And it's so you have the natural fall that happens after a peak. You put together with that the percentage of our population that either has natural immunity or vaccine-based immunity. And you can see why it falls like it has. And again, looking at the last several days, I'm very, very confident it will continue to fall in the coming weeks. In fact, it got below 7 a couple days in a row, which we hadn't seen that in a while. I'd go back to March to see numbers get that low. And then in hospitalizations, again, a steep decline, steeper than what we saw in the previous wave. And it's at 50% of its previous peak. We're feeling good that that's headed down into low levels. In fact, I think that this, right here, where it got really low previously in the fall or in the winter before the spring wave, I think we're going to get lower than that, perhaps quite a bit lower. If you look back here, what it was last summer at fewer than 700, wouldn't surprise me if we got much lower than that as well. So looking at deaths, fatalities associated with COVID-19, you see very clearly now that peak in the decline. This is a lagging indicator. So This is the last thing to start going down because of the way that the disease progresses. But we can confidently say that the vaccine has made a huge difference in terms of saved lives. About 1,700 fewer deaths in this particular wave as compared to the fall when we had a similar size wave of infections hit the state. And so that's great news, just really outstanding difference that the vaccines have made, literally 1,700 lives. Now, if we compare ourselves to the rest of the country, looking back, remember this is from last week. These results are as of last week. Michigan was still first, but look at that difference between number 1 and number 2. So close. And here's the thing, over the weekend, Michigan's decline kept on falling, and I went ahead and checked with the New York Times. And as of today, Colorado is number 1, Michigan is number 2. So for first time since March, Michigan is no longer number 1 in these numbers. I think I told you last week that 2 weeks from now, our reports will show that that Michigan is no longer number 1. And I couldn't wait till the next week, so I updated these slides with today's update from the New York Times to show that Michigan is now out of number 1. Also, when we look at the counties where they have the highest rates, the top 10 areas in Michigan, we have two in Michigan here, so both up north. And so they're smaller those are both very small counties population wise. And so even a small cluster of infections in a county like that can make the cases per 100,000 people higher than in more populated counties. But, if you were to look at this list 6 weeks ago, Michigan would have dominated it. So just 2 more that are left in the top 10. Looking at the country as a whole, I really like what I see here in terms of the United States. So the United States cases are going down actually at a pretty good clip over the course of the last 14 days, cases down 33% in America. The testing has held pretty level. It's a bit of hard to tell on this chart here, but a bit of a downward trajectory there on total testing. Hospitalizations have started coming down, so that lags the cases. So you see the cases going down here. Hospitalizations have started to go down. Of course, Michigan, New Jersey, New York all had a lot to do with these numbers starting to go down. Our numbers were kind of driving it, this bump when it was going up before, and then deaths started to come down now too. So across the United States, a lot of encouraging news to look at. And actually, I hear more debate that's happening right now. Are we at a point where we're getting close to or reaching herd immunity in our country? I don't think that we're going to know the answer to that question for sure until fall. But the fact that there's even a debate happening, I think, is a good sign that things are progressing in the right direction. Not exactly the case, though, as you look around the world. Definitely some hot spots around the world. The good news is, though, that these numbers have started cresting and falling in terms of the cases overall globally. So that's driven by a couple of factors here. First is Brazil, and second is India. Those 2 countries, you see, they're not quite as dark in color as before. So they have started to come down, still very high levels, but started to move in the right direction. So let's talk a little bit about vaccinations. You hear me all the time refer back to Israel, and that's because Israel is the gold standard. And how long did it take Israel to get to that point where they reached herd immunity in their cases down to almost nothing? And so here's where you see their weekly rate, and they had some pretty high rates. Sometimes when they're doing 7.3% of the population. And then, it started falling and it fell sharp. But here's the thing, here's a cumulative percentage of the population that was vaccinated. And so between December, and they got started before most, remember they didn't haggle on price for vaccines. They just bought whatever was available and whatever the cost was. So they started theirs a little bit earlier, and they hit 77.1% around March 1st. And it took them another 2.5 months to get the next 10%. So it took them, this beginning of the year, this first 3 months of the year, I guess it was 3.5 months to get to 77. And then after 77, this next 10% of the population, it took them to over 2 months. So that is it's an indication. It gets pretty hard after a while. And if we look at at some of the southern states, the ones that are the slowest in terms of vaccination, South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, these are their percentages: 36%, 32%, 32% of the population vaccinated. Actually, those are just the adults. And I'm sorry, that is the total population, but lagging behind a lot of the rest of the nation. But look at the rate and how much it has dropped off. And so for them, it's going to be a lot harder to reach the level that Michigan is already at. And here's where Michigan is at. And when I look at this, I think Michigan has generally done a nice job in. We had some ups and downs. There were some adjustments that had to be made in order to ramp things up. But I think as I look across the nation, we're pretty much middle of the pack. I think I've done a pretty decent job in hitting, as of when this chart was made, 55.4%. We're actually up to about 56.15, I think, when I calculated it yesterday. So we've made a little bit of progress even since here. And I think there's some chance that I think we could actually hit 60%, which is when there's more capacity reopenings, according to the VAC to normal plan, which might be defunct right now. It's not really clear. But I think we could possibly hit it in May, because our vaccination rate in just recent days has picked up some, I think, because of the 12 to 15-year-olds. But looking at the last 2 weeks, at least it stabilized. So 153,000, 148,000 for those 2 weeks. There was a pretty precipitous drop here. And the fact that it stabilized, I think, gives me some confidence that, we're going to plug away at that type of rate. I think next week you'll see it jump up a little bit because of 12 to 15-year-olds. And so we'll be on our way. So really everything is heading in the right direction right now. I think Michigan is stacking up pretty decent against the rest of the nation on vaccines. And finally, we're no longer number one in terms of infection rates in our state. We spent a lot of time on top there. So on the numbers, we'll keep close track of those still. But I think really at this point, we're going to head into a season here where numbers get really, really low. So it'll be a point where I think it's going to look better than it did last summer. And last summer, as you might recall, numbers got extremely low. And that's probably going to have an impact on rules moving pretty soon. Michigan is already starting to stick out compared to a lot of other states. I saw where Massachusetts, for example, every week I try to feature another state and what they're doing. The capacity limits in Massachusetts are set to expire at the end of this month. And then the emergency will expire. They're predetermined that they're just going to let it expire in the middle of June when the existing order expires. So even Massachusetts, right? So nobody would ever accuse Massachusetts of not following the science, and nobody would accuse Massachusetts of being some sort of right-wing state. They're not. So I think it's a good example and an indication that I think that the approach here in Michigan is probably going to the approach toward the pandemic and the rate of change is probably going to increase. And so buckle up. I think we're going to have we're going to have a lot of moving pieces coming up, and probably some frustrations along the way in terms of clarity and rules. But I do think that there's forward progress starting now, and it's not going to be denied. I think it's going to continue. So, all right. So I'm going to now introduce and welcome to be on the small business briefing today, Mike Burns from the American Society of Employers. And we'd like to have Mike on. You'll remember him if you've been on this briefing. We've had him on many, many times to talk a lot about issues that are in front of our members. And I want to talk now about some HR issues that as it results to face coverings, face masks, and this situation where now the rules say, at least the epidemic emergency order says, and I think the MISOHA rules are likely to follow, that say you can go without a mask if you're fully vaccinated. And the epidemic emergency order says you can ask the employee as a good faith effort, or you can just post signs. So I want to dig into this, Mike, because people throw around the term HIPAA pretty loosely. In most cases, when I hear HIPAA referred to, it's in a situation that HIPAA clearly doesn't apply to, but it's just kind of thrown out there just in so many different circumstances. And I thought it might make sense to just try to clear that up, not necessarily to make anybody an expert on HIPAA, but rather just guidance on asking employees if they are vaccinated or not. If an employer wanted to, are there any pitfalls? What are the things that you need to think about?
Yes, thank you, Brian. Employers, as we get into this next phase of, the impact our regulations and our, the practices we adopted for safety and health, we're now getting into the next phase where employers are going to have to be on top of these changes that are going on around, the employees who are at various stages of, vaccination and such. As far as HIPAA goes, it's often, thrown around as kind of the first reason not to share any information whatsoever. But HIPAA is typically, or is I should say, is designed to protect direct or personal health information that the healthcare providers and insurers need to do their business. It is not something, unless, of course, in the area of being self-insured and you're reaching out to your insurer for information about claims, or you're doing other things with the doctor, even workers' comp, injuries and such, where you have to interact with the doctor. Now you're in the world of HIPAA, and you got to be very careful about what you do with that information, and avoid just disclosing it to people that have no direct contact or need to know that information. You get into who's had a vaccination. That is a perfectly acceptable and legal question to ask employees. The minefield starts when you try and go beyond that and ask, well, why haven't you been vaccinated, or the particular reasons or situation behind that individual's healthcare information, and you're never sure of what might come back at you. And for example, as employers, we have to stop when we start hearing about a disability that may be involved in this situation. As employers, we're also have to keep an eye out on religious convictions and such that come into play that may prevent somebody or have somebody not getting vaccinated and such. Again, stop when you get the information, whether they've been vaccinated or not. Don't go too much further than that, or further than that at all, because now you open up the whole issue of possibly HIPAA, but more, you've got confidentiality concerns in general that you just don't want to be providing that info or knowing that information. I think we're going to talk a little bit about personnel files and what to do with this information once we get our hands on it. This information now becomes medical, and if you're collecting documentation of any kind, you're going to want to keep that information separate from the general personnel file, as you would do with any other medical information you've had to collect regarding individual employees. So that's, in that arena, it's very confidential, and you got to make sure you don't have that just lying around. As with all medical files, you have them separate from the personnel file, and you lock them away.
So just as kind of a direct summary, then you, whether or not you want to ask is one thing, but you can ask, are you vaccinated? And the main thing is, if they say no, you don't ask why.
Don't ask why. Now, are you just handcuffed to not do anything about it? If they are not getting vaccinated, now the employer has to go into a analysis of whether this individual can be in the workplace. We are all still under MIOSHA, and on top of them, we're under OSHA. And as we were talking a little earlier before the program started, they haven't come out with their rules as it applies to the workplace. What we've seen so far are the rules as it applies to the, I guess, the customer facing, the public facing situation regarding masking and so forth. We expect MIOSHA to come out with rules very shortly. I just talking to Brian, and this is from my side of the investigation, it looked like they were trying to get something out before the 24th, when the governor said, remote work prohibitions can go away. It'll be interesting to me to see whether they go beyond that. And then after that, we have our big brother OSHA that's going to be promulgating regulations around this. And MIOSHA is going to have to step into line with them, as I understand, being one of the 23 or so states that have their own safety and health operation.
All right, so some solid advice there then is that when you get to that point of an employee who is, you have some that are vaccinated. If an employer chooses to ask, you don't have to. If you choose to ask, then the individual provides some form of proof, maybe the vaccine card, for example. Again, if the employer requires it, but you don't just throw it in the into the employee file or somewhere where other employees who are not authorized can get it.
I would think twice about taking anything or making copies of anything if they've basically given you the information that they're vaccinated. Now you're good to go. You still have to comply with the the screening and all the information in the event that they contract a form of this and are going symptomatic with it. But yeah, you definitely want to stop once they've shown you that they're vaccinated. A word about mandatory vaccination. Employers aren't going there en masse, but we are hearing employers considering that. And I've had conversations with a couple employers who are doing it, even those that are involved in the retail. You're opening up some possible liability issues if you want to go mandated. Again, with our friends with MIOSHA, you've got your MIOSHA 300 form. If you're mandating vaccination, you're going to have to watch out for adverse reactions to that vaccination as a possible reportable injury or illness, I should say. So that's one that you go there. The other problem with mandatory is going to be on the employee relations side. If a person says, no, I don't want to get vaccinated, I'm not going to get vaccinated. Now, what is your recourse as an employer? You can say, well, then you can't be here, but we're all struggling with a tight labor pool. And do you really want to go there from not only an employee relations standpoint, where you're going to have to discipline or worse with the person, but also possibly lose a valuable employee at that point too. So be careful when you step into the area of mandated vaccinations. You raise some concern, or you raise some potential problems after you go there. Be nice, but and I think a friend, the other thing that is out there is in the area of wage and hour. You're going to be getting into situations where employees are maybe incentivized to take a vaccination and so forth in that case. You also want to be concerned about the fact that if they're going on their own time and you're requiring them to go there, that you might involve hours work, particularly in the mandated vaccination situation. Employers are getting into some incentives for going out and getting vaccinations. This is on the voluntary side of it. Just be careful there if you're getting into monetary incentivization, that if it's a set amount as opposed to a one-off type, you might get into considerations of wage and hour and impacting what goes into the regular rate. Check with your counsel, legal counsel on that if you're getting into a more, I guess, systematic method of compensation for taking for doing vaccinations or anything that has to do with getting your shots and complying and so forth.
Okay, so just so you get a sense for how many issues that employers need to deal with, and as we take in these questions, and we want to try and address as many of them as we possibly can. Another one that has come up, actually, it's come up throughout, but I would say now with all the changes that are in front of us. So maybe an employer decides, all right, we're gonna allow no face masks when a person is fully vaccinated, assuming we get the changes that we think are coming from MISOHA. So we say no face masks allowed, or no face masks required for those who are vaccinated. Those who are unvaccinated still have to. Say the employer is going to do the spot check, but not take the card, not make a copy of it, but show the proof. Okay, proof is shown. Now that'll be hard for employers to keep track of. I mean, especially if you have an employer with 50 employees, and wait, which ones told me and which ones didn't. That will be a challenge. It sounds like, especially if you're not going to have people wearing badges, probably. Although I suppose the face mask is kind of an indication, but I guess it would be for non-compliance. It would be hard to tell after a certain number of employees, to just kind of remember who had shown that or not. But let's say you got an employee, you got all those policies in place, and now the employee says, I've got a medical reason for not wearing a face mask. Now, in that case, obviously a remote work accommodation is a possibility. We've covered that before. But let's say that it's the type of position where remote work is not really a possibility. Can the employer ask for proof of that medical condition that prevents compliance? So in other words, I don't have to wear a mask, and I don't get a vaccine, and I can still do my job in person. These things get kind of, they get a little bit stickier all the time. And I can tell you this exact question has come up in a real life situation. So I'm kind of curious to hear the answer myself.
Yeah, and I apologize, Brian. The core of the question is, what kind of certification or what kind of documentation can I get that this person's actually has a medical condition that prohibits or that makes it difficult for them to wear the face mask? Yes, you certainly. I mean, as with everything, you can go to documentation, ask the person to say, hey, get me get me some kind of note from your doctor, just as you would, any other accommodation. I think it's a fair question to ask. Be careful, again, what you do with the information you receive, lock it down, but you do have the ability to ask for some proof that this condition, because otherwise, this is the underlying thing, medical confidentiality aside, this is your workplace. This is your workplace, and it's a private property. You can set up the rules however you want. And it's something to keep in mind as the rules loosen up out of MISOHA and OSHA. You can always maintain a tighter safety and health environment there should you deem it necessary. So again, as long as you're going in the more restrictive practices and such, you're okay. You just can't go become looser than what the MISOHA says. And again, to this documentation issue, you have the right to say, hey, going to need to see something more than just your say so on the fact you're medically unable to use a face mask, because this is a safety feature. This is a safety protective PPE that we require.
And I think that the EEOC did put out some pretty clear and direct guidance on just that fact earlier in the pandemic. The idea of that if there's a clear and present threat, that that you can enforce the requirement, and that a person doesn't essentially have the right to not provide documentation, and doesn't have the right to not comply in their own terms in your workplace.
Correct.
So I appreciate that, Mike. Well, we've run out of time here. Let me just run through just a couple really quick hits. First is kind of aggressive language from the CDC late last week, where the director said very bluntly, only unvaccinated people are at risk by unmasking. Let me say that again. Only unvaccinated people are at risk by unmasking. In other words, that is an unusually direct statement from a risk-adverse organization, the CDC, in defending their decision that people that are vaccinated can remove their masks. But what it's saying is that they have complete confidence in the vaccination. And we haven't heard that from the CDC. In fact, we've heard the opposite from the CDC, kind of hedging against the effectiveness of the vaccine. They seem to have really embraced what their own data says. We are hoping to get a statement from MISOHA anytime that says that employers may follow, for even their workers, employees may follow the new epidemic emergency order from Friday, saying that you didn't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated, even though it conflicts with MISOHA rules. The MISOHA rules, the full rewrite of the rules will take longer, but in the meantime, we're looking for them to make a statement. Federal OSHA already made that statement to harmonize with the CDC. So I'm a little disappointed that the federal OSHA moved faster than our state could move, but nevertheless, things are moving quickly, hopefully in the right direction, even though there's a tremendous amount of confusion in the transition here. So thank you so much for joining us today. That is all the time that we have, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday, and I'll probably have Rob back at my side. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.